perspective, understanding the track record, background, relationships of individuals and entities who they want to do business with, and at the same time helping them resolve issues that they may get themselves into. And then finally, a bit at the bottom, is helping our clients protect their human, their intellectual, and their physical property when they're working in China or indeed around the world. I was asked to talk a little bit up front before we move on to the general topic of risk, corporate risk in China, about some of the broader regional risk dynamics. So if you don't mind, just a couple of minutes here. The four areas of topics. The first, and this is sort of in terms of country dynamics, the first is talking about China. China, unfortunately, gets distilled down into a few pithy sound bites. It is this or it is this. It is wonderful or it is terrible. Everything works, this is what the future is going to look like, or China is going to collapse in 10 years' time. I think that's probably a nature of punditocracy. People get asked to make predictions and they have to be bold and they have to be brash. But one thing I think we can say is that China, the incredible change that's coming through China, the massive growth in the economy, and in power just generally, it is like a sort of teenager learning to use its muscles. And both internally, the struggles that it's going through are reflective of that, and externally. Further afield, the question that's now going to happen with India is, will the expectations post the BJP be fulfilled? Again, that is something we're slightly skeptical of. There's a sort of post-election euphoria in India. One of the problems with India, as opposed to China, is that power in India is very bottom-up. It is a state-controlled place. It doesn't come down, power doesn't come down from Delhi, it comes a lot from the states. And I think the euphoria of the BJP's election will gradually wear off as the country gets to grips with the realization that the BJP doesn't control most of the states. Next point on Southeast Asia. When I was asked to send these slides through about Southeast Asia, or about Asia generally, all I could say honestly was that I didn't know what was going to happen over the next month in Southeast Asia. So that's why I just put changes. Since I sent these slides through, in Southeast Asia we have seen a coup d'etat in Thailand, we've seen anti-China riots in Vietnam, and then coming up, we've got an election in Indonesia, and looking a little bit further afield in 2016, we've got an election in the Philippines. What I think is the common theme here is there is huge volatility, which sometimes is underestimated. And then finally, on the other underestimated threat is geopolitics. Not just in the terms of the South China Sea, the East China Sea, but I think people tend to forget about the geopolitics moving across Asia, in South Asia, between Pakistan and India, and even between China and India. Again, these tend to be fairly outlying risks, but if they do come to fruition, they could be very significant. Moving on to some of the current challenges in China. I think when we're talking about the issues of corporate fraud, of corporate corruption in China, it's useful to have a little bit of the broader cultural understanding. People go a lot of the time, oh well, there's fraud and corruption in China, and that's just the way the country is. It's not that's just the way the country is. It's not seen as a right, but it is seen by people operating in China as the norm. There's multiple reasons behind this. There are limited enforceability of contracts, rapid upheaval in the country, limited awareness of standard business practices. I think the point it comes down to is that there is a feeling among many companies operating here that it is not necessarily the right thing to defraud the government or defraud the company which you're operating in, but it is seen as the norm. There is an understanding that everybody is doing it, therefore you can rationalize it. There is a widespread perception of limited harm done. If I'm taking 1% of the procurement costs, I'm not doing much damage to my company. Oh, if I give the logistics contract for this business to my brother, we may be taking money away from what is the shareholders, but we know that he's okay, and my brother, he's going to do a decent job. And this is seen actually often as a good thing. If you're working with somebody you know well, it doesn't matter whether the contract can be enforced or not, because the long-term relationship is a lot more valuable. And then finally, it's sometimes seen as an alternative form of remuneration. We see this in SOEs, state-owned enterprises, which control, whether you're aware of it or not, a large proportion of the economy. The point is, you get a job which is paying you 1,000 or 10,000 RMB a month, but you may be able to double that through kickbacks, through supplemental salaries. It's not just seen in SOEs, it's seen in government as being a sort of supplemental form of remuneration, and even in hospitals. Doctors, one of the big challenges that pharmaceutical companies have had operating here is that it's seen as an alternative form of remuneration. So Tom, you're going to talk a little bit about the integrity risk dynamics in China.
Hi, everyone. So I think one of the reasons that we sit here and talk to you about integrity risks is partly because we do a lot of cases in China on both preventative side, but more importantly, we do a lot of cases when company has stuff gone wrong, whether there was an embezzlement case happened, whether there's corruption investigation happened by the authority, internally there's a whistleblower. So we've seen a lot of scenario situations that how companies, operations operating in China, some of them very sizable, long history working in China, has seen fairly sort of basic errors made during their operation, which resulted in significant financial losses and also reputation losses as well. Just on the legal side, the legal situation in China, I'm not about to talk about the laws and all that, but sort of the general how people perceive sort of when they operate China in terms of laws and regulations. Contract, I mean, this is nothing new and it's not unique to China, but what's unique to China is contracts are not, I mean, everybody signs contract. There's contract for everything. You often don't, find abundant of that. Very, very well-written contracts. But the reason, the part of that is, once that's done, that's sort of filed somewhere else and nobody look at it ever again, and business goes on as usual. And I think that the scale that's been happening and sort of how normal people sort of look at that, that's fairly unique in China. Anything from employment contracts to supplier contracts to conflict of interest to sort of non-compete, that sort of thing. When people all know that exists, people never really pay attention to that. I think that's something that is quite unique in China. Also in terms of when you have an issue, time and time again when we investigate whether it's kickback, whether it's embezzlement, whether it's thief in sort of corporations in China, you have a lot of evidence, some of the fairly solid evidence. You sort of have the lawyers or the legal counsel sort of submit that to the police. Often the time to take that sort of from the legal process extremely long, and often you comes to a point that you just say, actually, there's no point doing this because the cost of the time and the efforts of going through that legal procedures is way more large than just simply write that off, fire that person, pay him off, start fresh. And this is not so much about particular. This is very sort of widespread across China. You get some of the variations in terms of like jurisdictions. Shanghai is a little bit better, but overall, this is sort of common sort of how people see the legal systems in terms of wrongdoings, especially white-collar crime, that sort of things. Just a little bit about guanxi, the relationship in China. That's a fairly neutral word. It's not a negative word by itself. But what happened is, in China, this is related to contract. You have a contractual relationship. More often, you have a very personal relationship. Company itself does not have a guanxi. It's the people that have that. So if you say a certain company has a guanxi with the government, with SOE, as the state-owned companies, that sort of thing, it does not exist. It's the people who work in that corporation holds that relationship. And it's very important to keep that in mind from the sort of investors or sort of joint venture partners, for example, because whoever person that holds a relationship in that company leave or run into a bad blood with you, whoever that guanxi that the company holds, go with it. So it's the people that matters, never the company itself. I mean, just a little bit of, from our observation, how all these cases that were done in China, all these situations that we've looked at in China. MNCs, multinational companies, has a fairly long history of operating in China. A lot of them has been in China for 20, 30 years even, some of the largest ones. So they have a very big presence here, not just geographically, but also in terms of the workforce, in terms of the revenue. The business in China is very big. But you'd be surprised at how little attention that has been paid to sort of compliance, internal control, and how ineffective some of this compliance has been, even for some of the largest corporations operating in China. Companies are under sort of really, really high pressure to grow their business. 20% of the growth targets are not, it's not uncommon in China. So what goes with that is everything in terms of compliance, in terms of training, that sort of takes a back seat. People really focusing on sales at whatever cost, and corruption will come with that. And that's a very, very common issues in China. One of the most recent high-profile cases, GSK, being investigated by the Chinese government. One of the key sort of issue with that is they have unusually high growth over the past 5 years in China, and the Chinese government attribute a lot of corruption issues to that sort of growth target the company has. So what does this all mean? So, China, UK Anti-Bribery Act, but it is precisely because of that, because all these individuals that you've been dealing with, you've been doing business with, they are an extension of the Chinese government and the money of the Chinese government. So that's a very, very important point to sort of keep in mind. And also, when you have that kind of state involvement here, any kickbacks, any sort of dispute, you're not just dealing with an employee, individual. You're not just dealing with a private company. You are effectively dealing with the political connections, political backgrounds that behind some of these individuals and companies. So what's the impact on companies operating in China, on both Chinese companies and foreign companies operating in China? Again, this is observation that we have. Companies generally, in the procurement system is very lax. There's very little control over the procurement, partly because, when the economy is going really, really fast, you don't really pay a lot of attention to the cost. But partly also because the supply chain is famously in China sort of infested with kickback issues, with embezzlements, so sub-quality products. And sometimes companies don't have that resources or expertise to manage that. Individuals, employees, the loyalties, the individual employees working in a particular company, a lot of times the loyalties are not to a company itself, it's to their managers, to the people who hire that company. For a lot of companies who end up selling part or going to joint ventures, the employee force is very divided in terms of loyalty. Company rules are not followed. Instead, individual sort of orders and preferences are more sort of important to them, to the employees. So, I'm not going to go through all of these, just because I think we were sort of keen to get to some of the case studies. Then I'll let you sort of run through some of the specifics of the Chinese environment.
One point that's worth noting is there has been a significant change in China in the past 18 months in terms of a crackdown on corruption. When Xi Jinping came to power, one of the things he said was, I'm going to launch a crackdown on corruption. And we all poo-pooed that slightly. Corruption crackdowns in China are to Chinese politics, what motherhood and apple pie is to American presidential elections. Everybody talks about it, believes it, it's a wonderful thing, but the substance of them is often fairly minimal. This has substance. There is a new level of anti-bribery and anti-corruption enforcement action across all industries. That is affecting businesses which operate in China. The healthcare and pharmaceutical sectors have been the biggest target of this. The reason why is the corruption crackdown happening? Because corruption feeds directly into the cost of living. And this is one of the biggest political issues. People assume that China, because it's not an electoral system, does not demand the consent of the people ruled. That is actually completely wrong. If in many ways it pays greater attention to the consent of the people ruled because it cannot rely on the support of minority or certain interest groups. And the concern over the cost of healthcare was seen as a very significant issue. So since August 2013, there's been a significant step up also of commercial corruption laws, as well as cases against pharmaceutical companies. And companies are now being targeted, not just individuals. A lot of the coverage of the investigation into GSK has centered on the fact that it's a Western company. I can tell you this is not just applying to Western companies, this is applying to Chinese companies as well. IMS, the healthcare research body, recently produced a report which said drug company profits in China had been hit by about 20% because of the corruption crackdown. And what we think is that this is going to spread to other sectors. Healthcare is the lowest hanging fruit. It's probably the most important sector, but there will be other sectors that will be targeted. Companies often, foreign companies operating in China often say, well, we've got good compliance standards, or we have a wonderful compliance system. Okay, that is not the situation. And I think one of the points that you can make a lot in China is that companies say, and investors say, but you're audited. Audit works outside China. It doesn't always work in China. Traditional audit methods are not effective when there is active collusion among tribes of employees and third parties. Okay? This is applies to the pharmaceutical sector, to the sort of investigations you're seeing there, where there has been bribes paid to government officials. But it also applies to companies like Sino-Forest. Who's aware of Sino-Forest here, by the way? Stick your hand up. So about a quarter of you are. Sino-Forest, Sino-Forest was a multi-billion-dollar company listed in Toronto. It owned forests in China. It claimed, at least, to own forests in China. It was audited, I think, by Ernst & Young. It turned out that they didn't own the forests in China. The shares collapsed. They're now worth zero. The bonds also collapsed. They're now worth close to zero. The big claim made by a lot of investors were, well, this company was audited properly. It had sign-off. They should have been, we had assurance that it was okay. This doesn't necessarily apply in China. There have been more than a handful of instances of listed Chinese companies, maybe listed in Hong Kong, listed in New York, listed in Singapore, which have been audited but have subsequently turned out to be fraudulent. Okay? You cannot rely on the audit process. The reason for that is where there is active collusion by the chief executive on downwards to defraud investors, the auditors will not spot it. They're not trained to, and the audit process is not designed to. So, what do you do to mitigate against this? There are various ways of doing it. One is the top-down method. This was done about 2 years ago for a large fund manager, a name that you will all be aware of. When you're doing an investment strategy, you benchmark against various financial metrics. But I think the previous speaker may have been looking at this sort of thing before. This is where we looked at governance metrics. So we had family ownership, number of family directors, historic changes, related party transactions, high level of account receivables, customer concentration, all these various, some quantifiable, some qualitative measures, which could indicate governance problems. And we benchmarked the whole portfolio of this investment manager on this basis. And what you came up with was a list of potential indicators of fraud. And I think some of these companies here have had issues of fraud subsequently. One of them, certainly PCD Stores, certainly had a fairly significant restatement of its accounts. So you can actually preemptively try and identify governance issues within the companies that you're looking to invest in. Or you can dig deeper. You can go from the macro level to the micro level. Tom.
Sure. So all this information, the public information, by the way. So this particular case, we did a very in-depth investigation, so research we did for the hedge fund manager. So we're looking at a company called China Zhongwang. So this is aluminium sort of window frame, that sort of material manufacturers based in North China. Just to give you a bit of a background on the company, it's actually the second largest IPO in Hong Kong in 2009. It was sponsored by UBS. So it's got all the right, so the auditors got all the right, so the sponsors, the blue chip, so the investment banks sponsor it, very, very well received by the market. Now, if you look deeper, what happened to it is the owner of the company is a Chinese PRC individual so this is the Chinese company selling a lot of aluminum products to the state. As it happens, the owner of the company's brother owns the company in the US as the receiving end. So essentially, he's selling all these products from the listed company to his brother in the US. Just to add to that.
Just to clarify, he didn't disclose this on the IPO prospectus.
Exactly. So this is not something that's been disclosed to the investors at the beginning. I mean, all these are public information, but you need to look. If you don't know where to look, you're assuming that he's selling to any unrelated parties. As it also happens, the next slide. Thank you, Ben. The wife of the main owner also owns a series of company and controls the individual who owns a company that is exporting as an export agent for China Zhongwang. So if you can see the picture, the companies who is helping China Zhongwang exporting its products and at its receiving end in the US are essentially all related to the main owner of that company. None of these are disclosed to the public. What does that mean? Well, two things really. One, he's able to inflating and manipulating some of the sales figures. And two, probably more importantly, the family who owns that company is able to extract some of the value from the list code into his private sort of wallet. There's very, very little oversight in terms of the pricing he's been selling to his brother, whether that's a market price, whether he's personally getting a portion of that revenue that's gone out, so extracted from this product sales. As also happens, the bank, the government bank in North China, is lending huge amount of money to China Zhongwang, is also a shareholder in that company. And obviously, all these are done through a series of entities that is not very easily to be detected by investors, and certainly were not disclosed during the IPO process. Now, what does that tell to the investors? You know, a company that's perfectly sort of has all the right auditors, all the right advisors, and well received by the market, can still have issues like that. That very serious. In any other market, this would be a major violation of the government regulations, stock exchange regulations. And this is not. And the issue is that this is not unique examples in China. Chinese companies were sort of listed in overseas, were hit by short sellers. All 23 of them has been delisted. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's 23 Chinese companies been listed in overseas, has been delisted in the past few years with issues like that. So this is a fairly widespread industry, sort of widespread issues in the Chinese companies. And obviously we can revisit some of this in the Q&A sections, but just a really quick example on this. We are also doing a lot of screenings. One of them is for a UK-based trust company on some of their investors from China. With very, very basic sort of due diligence on these investors, we were able to find quite a lot of interesting findings, such as the investor is an individual, is a couple actually. They've been convicted in China in the past for sort of illegal securities trading, insiders trading. He's been sued by his previous customers. He's also have a lot of links to criminal gangs in China. Things that you would expect it to be, people with that kind of wealth status and that kind of job really should not really be having that sort of link, but they do. And that also shows that this ties back when we talk about the legal system.